Hi, welcome to Moynagh Bass Fishes, and this is Jim Moynagh, and you won't see me doing any bass fishing on this particular video because this is the video. I haven't done one of these for a while because I haven't been at the family lake place right here for much at all lately. And this is where I find my dad's vintage collection of old fishing magazines. So here we have a vintage Bassmaster magazine, September-October edition, 1997. On the cover is the famous Harry and Charlie cartoon characters from Swamp Gas Corners or Bayou or something like that in Florida. And there's old stump jumpers, their boat. And there was a name for that big bass that they could never catch. Anyways, Don Worth and Cliff Shelby. Cliff Shelby was the artist. Don Worth was the storyteller. So that was always, I remember reading those as a kid. And I always made a point to read that. So anyways, but we're not going to be reading that story. I am going to, this is kind of timely. Right out, I haven't even opened this thing. I haven't even looked in it, so I don't know what I'm going to find. But there's a subtitle here called "Bass Fishing in the Face of the," right here. Bass fishing in the face of the West's worst drought. So apparently, back in the day, around this issue at that time, the West was having a bad drought, which apparently it has been lately. So why don't we just dig into that article? And this is Falling Asleep to Jim Moynagh Reading Vintage Fishing Magazines. That is the name of this kind of series that I got going. Like I said, it's been a while. The ads in these things are just awesome. I mean, just awesome. Some of the old pictures are pretty cool in these magazines. But anyways, where do we got to go? There's an article on Treasure Lake. I believe that's a place in Cuba, I believe. Oh, here's one, The Anti-Tournament Backlash by Robert Mercer. Roland Martin's Perfect Game Plan by Roland Martin. That's kind of cool. God, there's so many things that would be worthwhile reading in here. Why can't I find the one on the west? Where's the one on the west? Come on. It's War Against the Purple Pest, whatever that is. Bassin is a matter of life or death. Yeah, I know. Luck is a four-letter word spelled work. Yeah, a lot of work into it as a pro. Can weekend anglers make the pro ranks? Interesting. But where's this thing about the West? Oh, revival on the Potomac. I got a tournament later this year on the Potomac, so that would be cool. Oh, the flipping system. Part 3 of an exclusive 6-part instruction series on the most talked about new bassin method on the tournament trail, which would be flipping. That is really cool. Well, dang it, I read through everything there, and there's nothing. Oh, see page 4. Never mind. All right, Who Pulled the Plug is the title of this. Who Pulled the Plug by Larry Green. And we have 1, 2, 3, about 4 pages of this. You got 4 pages to fall asleep. So here we go. Who Pulled the Plug by Larry Green. I'll let you see the picture first. So there it is, and and you can see the typical low water mark on the shoreline. You see the tree line, and then you got all the empty shore there of just gravel. Pretty typical look there. All right. there are both pluses and minuses with regard to bassing during this severe drought year in the West. Let this veteran basser explain a few and in turn offer some advice that may prove to be beneficial to your bass fishing. Despite the ugly atmosphere and low water, some anglers are saying bassing has never been better. Here's why. Okay, bass fishing in the face of a drought in big letters. Here's the caption for that photo. You get that low down feeling when viewing California's Shasta Lake, but despite its ugly appearance and low water, some Bassmasters believe that bass fishing has never been better. So I mean, I'd say calling that ugly is a bit of an overstatement, but just a lot of exposed bank. All right, here we go. Into the body of this article. It was not the first one, and it probably will not be the last. Nevertheless, the drought of 1977 will probably go down in the annals of California's history as one of the worst. This is a really cool article because all those lakes were so low last year, and a lot of them are refilling with some of the rain we've had this winter, but I don't know, this is somewhat timely anyhow. I guess maybe a year ago would have been even better to read this, but anyways, this is the time of year when California's more than 100 water storage reservoirs should be filled to such a capacity that they are flowing over their spillways. It is the time of year when millions of cubic feet of water should be flowing into the river systems as these same reservoirs begin releasing water in preparation for the late summer snowmelts and usual heavy runoffs that follow. But this spring was unlike any other California's history, and the situation promises to get worse before it can get better, for there is not enough of a snowpack in the Cascade and Sierra Nevada mountains combined to even begin to fill all the swimming pools in Los Angeles County. These major reservoirs, which are considered to be the primary habitats for California's population of black bass, are, at this writing, down anywhere from 90 to 175 feet below their capacity. Some hydroelectric engineers concerned about power producing capabilities of thirsty generators are saying that some of the larger, harder hit reservoirs will take as much as 4 normal winters to fully recover. At a time when crop loss and other lost revenues from agricultural strains are measured in millions of dollars, I suppose the concern over the loss of the fishery and related habitats take a backseat. But there is much to be concerned about with regards to recreational losses as well. As the California drought scene goes on, so does the concern over these fisheries. In particular, the warm water fishery, which will be one of the hardest hit. Despite the very dismal picture, there are rays of hope, even in the most hopeless appearing situations. I'll be the first to admit that California's barren shore reservoirs are a sight for sore eyes, and in some areas the impact of the drought may eventually prove fierce, if not fatal, to portions of the state's warm water habitats for black bass and other related fish. That was kind of a long sentence. Despite this rather dismal outlook, the black bass and bass fishing will survive in California. Now, this is bold print. In spite of the obvious seriousness of the drought, the fishing will not be as adverse as some tend to believe it will. And in some cases, the actual fishing for black bass is much better than usual on some of these major reservoirs because of the low water. What I'm saying in essence is this. If you're one of those Western Bassmasters who's been so discouraged by the scares of the drought that you have hung up your bassin rods, then you have probably made a terrible mistake. Fishing on some of these major reservoirs is better than it's ever been in spite of these adverse effects of the drought. Okay, here's some more bold print. Here we go. In most cases, I'm finding that boating access is the only stumbling block. Boating access is a problem in some major reservoirs which are already down 100 feet or more below their concrete launch ramps. However, newly developed floating launch ramps are showing some promise of improving access for boaters. Now, that's new to me. I didn't know they were floating launch ramps. Was that something that actually was and then they discontinued it? Or, this is me talking, have they discontinued that? It didn't work out? Or do they still use floating launch ramps? That's interesting. I've never heard of them. So I'm guessing they went away, but I don't know. I'm just a dopey fisherman. Okay, next subtitle. Why bass improves in drought conditions. Okay, before I even read that, I would just, to me, there's less water for the bass to hide in. So that you got less water, so that concentrates the fish. That would be my explanation. Why is the fishing better in reservoirs, even when the good shoreline cover is 100 feet high and dry above your head? Think about this for a moment. Take a lake that's normally 4,000 surface acres. Now, suddenly reduce this to 1,000 surface acres. Remaining is the same number of fish that you had spread over 4,000 surface acres, but now they're compressed into 1/4 of the area. Bold print. The end result of this overcrowding causes a food shortage and, in short, just plain old, that's OL apostrophe, just plain old hungry bass. While fishing these low water reservoirs at this writing, we are finding 6 times the numbers of bass occupying habitats that normally produce only 1 or 2 bass during normal water levels or periods. The bass we're catching are hitting fast and hard as if every strike is their last meal. The bass, both largemouth and smallmouth, do not show signs of starvation. They are still plump and full of fight, yet judging from their compulsion to strike, it is more than obvious that these fish are hungry. As economically disastrous as the drought has been to landside resorts, marinas, and such, not landside, lakeside resorts and marinas and such, the drought's effect in respect to canceled vacations and weekend fishing trips was the result of more of a psychological effect on fishermen than anything else. We're finding that these barren shore, low water reservoirs are turning off bass fishermen when in fact some of these reservoirs are producing better than ever before. Perhaps I sound ambiguous at a time when the West is suffering a very serious drought situation, but the truth of the matter is that we're taking advantage of any bass fishing opportunity we can, and we're finding good fishing in most of these large, hard-hit reservoirs. Another plus is that those few Bassmasters who are persistent on these reservoirs are not only catching lots of bass, but they're fishing in relative solitude. So, all you Western guys, is that what you've experienced this time with this drought? Are there fewer fishermen on the lake, and are the fish biting more hungry than ever? Let me know. All right, next paragraph. In bold, it says, there are both pluses and minuses with regards to bass fishing during this drought year in the West. Let me explain a few and in turn offer some advice that may prove to be beneficial. Okay, here we go. Next subtitle, wind, low water give bassers fits. On the minus side of the fence, I'm finding that with direct relation to the extreme low waters, the biggest single defeating factor is the wind. Bold print. The problem with the wind is these low water reservoirs. Let me start over. The problem with the wind in these low water reservoirs is this. In a major portion of California's water impoundments, the water level is already far below bedrock. In many areas, the only substrates left along the shorelines are barren, sloping mud banks. The exposed bottom is about 75% of these reservoirs is comprised of muds that have collected sediments and ooze since the birth of the reservoir. Wind brings choppy waters, and the choppy waters quickly churn up the silt and turn these low water reservoirs into chocolate bathtubs. Whoa, I could go for a chocolate bathtub. Could you imagine taking a bath in a bathtub filled with like Hershey's chocolate syrup? It sounds kind of gross, but it sounds delicious at the same time. Anyways, when this happens, the bass and other game fish quickly move further offshore and into deeper portions of the lake. Bass do not like to pump silt across their gills, thus they retreat to deeper, cleaner waters. But wait a minute, a lot of guys like to fish these mud lines. So what this guy is saying is maybe contrary to mudline fishing. Winds are the most prevalent factor in putting bass down and off the bite. We have found that the bass will come back to the shallow shoreline to feed after the wind stops, but this might take 2 or 3 days depending on the severity of the disturbance. After a good strong wind, I usually wait a day or so. Then, when I can get back out on the lake, I stay further offshore and plug the finger points in 12 to 15 feet of water. Bull print. I've noticed time and time again that those long, slow, sloping finger points seem to be the first place that bass return to after the wind has severely kicked up and muddied the lake. Okay. Plugging with deep diving crankbaits, jigs, and plastic worms seems to produce well in the 12 to 15 foot range following a 2 to 3 day blow. If the lake seems to be a muddy color, we found that the darker color pattern crankbaits bring the quickest strikes. As the silt begins to settle again and the murky waters start to clear up, results may increase by switching to lighter colored pattern baits. All right, next subtitle. Search out any isolated cover. Bold print. The most obvious minus, and I might add the most discouraging, is the lack of shoreline cover. In all of the low water reservoirs we fish, we're finding that about 70% of our catch of largemouth as well as smallmouth bass are coming from the 3 to 5 foot shallows in the mid-afternoon hours. Bassmasters are finding it tough to locate any kind of shoreline structure if the water level in a number of California reservoirs more severely hit is as much as 100 feet below the tree line. I look for any form of what I call isolated cover. In most cases, that kind of isolated cover I refer to may pertain to a single rock no bigger than a man's head, yet that single rock may produce upwards of 2 or 3 bass. With so many of the larger predatory game fish like the bass crammed into the main body of the lake, you'll find that the majority of the prey, threadfin and other minnows, are schooling in water so shallow that no decent-sized bass could navigate without choosing to swim on its side. What? Bold print. Where we are finding great numbers of minnows pushed up onto these shallows, we usually also find fair numbers of bass close at hand. Okay, that's all makes sense. Locating a deep water drop-off close to these minnow-infested shallows is often the key to taking lots of good bass. We've fished miles of absolutely barren shoreline and still managed to find good numbers of bass. More bold print. Another plus side of this situation is to look high upon the bank and find those isolated areas of loose rock, then follow an imaginary line down into the water. We're surprised to find a partial rock bottom in a different line with rocks high and dry above us, even though 100 feet of mud might exist between submerged rock and the shoreline. Loose rock on steep-sided reservoirs has a way of working itself down into the lake bottom. Where you find an extension of shoreline rocks, you'll usually find bass. So what they're talking about is what I call a rock slide, and actually, rock slides do attract bass. I've seen them attract bass in Ozark lakes. I've seen them attract bass in Canadian Shield lakes. It's just, you'll have this vertical wall of a bluff, and then you got this rock slide that kind of offers just a different variation of the shoreline there. And the bass draw to it. So, yeah, this guy's right on spot there. Okay. There is another very pronounced plus that I'd like to mention with regards to taking advantage of the bass fishing opportunities during this drought. With all due respect for those who love the sport of water skiing, I must add that water skiing and black bass fishing are not, I repeat, are not always compatible. I wonder if anybody's like water skied and trolled at the same time. That's just me thinking. The plus factor here is that the low water has created many shallow water areas, stick-ups, exposed ledges, and partially submerged islands, all of which are definite disadvantages to skiers. In a number of these hard-hit reservoirs, water skiing has been eliminated altogether, if only through this period of drought, and in most cases, other than perhaps a main deep water channel in the middle of the lake, the speed limits were severely restricted for everyone's safety. So are we really seeing a reduction in pleasure boat activity on these low water lakes out west? I really don't know. This was a definite plus for bass fishermen because it ensured that these reservoirs were placid, quiet, and remained very fishable during the midsummer months, a contrast to the norm. Now, I do understand that some of these western reservoirs are absolutely party central. So, anyways, I still caution bass fishermen with bass boats and their high-powered fast rigs. These low-water reservoirs are no place for any fast, deep-draw boat. At reservoirs where you can launch a big bass boat, after you get where you're going slowly, you should tilt your motor up and go to your electrics. At all times, leave your depth finder running and watch the depths. Be especially careful in murky waters where you cannot visually see hidden stick-ups. While many reservoir anglers are having difficulty launching bigger bass boats during severe low water periods, those bassmen with car top or small trailable aluminum boats won't have to miss a single day of fishing. Many a time I left my bass boat in the garage and relied entirely on an aluminum 12-footer rigged with a 15 horsepower motor and electric for some of my better bass fishing outings in these severely hit California reservoirs. I have not been denied bass fishing anywhere because of it, and I usually cannot find any limiting factors fishing out of the smaller aluminum 12-footer. How many of you guys can fish out of an aluminum 12-footer? Okay, next subtitle, low water levels require new tactics. But before we get into that, we got to show you a picture. Okay, in this picture, the caption says, even if you can't launch a boat, walking the shoreline can produce bass. Many areas are now inaccessible for trailer boats. Leave the big bass rig at home and stalk the bass cautiously and quietly in the shallows. So this guy's going to have himself a delicious fish fry, I see. All right, low water levels require new tactics. Some of California's smaller bass lakes have been so starved for water that they have been closed to all boating. But here again, don't let that defeat you. Leave your boat at home and walk the shorelines and fish if you have to. You'll be surprised at the new fishing prospects you'll encounter just by walking the shoreline in pursuit of bass. Remember, the bass are still there, and they are hungrier than ever. Many bassmen, this is bold, many Bassmasters, including yours truly, have found the low water conditions to be highly continued on page 84. Highly all right, this is the last page. Highly advantageous for fly riders and light tackle artists who have taken to rubber rafts, water walkers, floats, and just plain old wading. Stalking the shallows in these early morning or late evening hours with bass bugs, streamer flies, spinners, and small crankbaits will reward you with some of bass fishing's finest attributes. Regardless of how you choose your plan of attack in these low water reservoirs, remember that you'll find the majority of bass feeding in very shallow water. That probably doesn't really necessarily hold true. The fact that they're in very shallow water. I mean, there's always fish shallow. We've heard that a million times, but yeah, in today's world of bass fishing, we are catching a lot of our fish offshore. Anyways, but also remember that bass in clear, shallow water are extremely spooky. You can turn a minus into a plus in this area simply by exercising caution and a quiet stalk. Good advice. Anytime in shallow water, quietly stalk. Quietly. All right. Whether I'm in a small boat, wading, or floating in a tube, I always fish the shallows cautiously and quietly. I make long casts with relatively light line, often casting my lure up onto dry land, then easing the bait into the water. Much of these newly exposed shallows in some of these drought-stricken reservoirs are receiving sunlight for the first time. Thus, new growths of flora is producing good cover for shallow water bass. However, be cautious that you're not fishing dead water due to low oxygen counts. Plant growth usually means increased oxygen. However, as a lake surface level continues to drop, die-offs of flora exist, and dead and dying plant life have high demands on oxygen, thus often depleting what appears to be very fishable weedy shallows of its life-giving oxygen. An oxygen meter will give you the answer whenever you are in doubt. So, always carry your oxygen meters with you, is my advice. Who all has an oxygen meter? Because I don't. And I didn't really... Hey, Lawrence, that's your next invention, is the oxygen meter. Whereas winds are a deterrent, often a subtle breeze is a benefit. A slight ripple over the surface in shallow water is often just the protection big bass prefer to move in on the shallows and feed. A slightly rippled surface makes it difficult for natural predators like ospreys and other birds of prey to pounce upon a bass in shallow water. Hungry bass will often take advantage of rippled waters and move in for a quick meal of minnows. Yes, the rippled waters does offer protection to bass and other fish up shallow. Sudden temperature changes or portions of unusually clear waters amidst more normally murky waters often help to pinpoint areas where underground springs feed a lake from the bottom up. These are primaries for big bass when you can find them. Most of California's reservoirs have been drawn down to the degree that many never before seen islands are now exposed for the first time. Such islands provide additional shorelines in which minnows seek refuge, and in turn bass seek the minnows. In any case, these newly exposed outcroppings of islands provide good habitats for bass. Don't pass them by, even if it means wading the length of a football field to get to them. All right, last 4 paragraphs. The head of this last subtitle here is "Be optimistic, lake is half full." Or, in this case, if we're referring to Lake Mead, be optimistic, Lake Mead is 25% full. To resort owners, marina operators, boat renters, and others who have severely suffered under the rigors of this drought, I suppose it might seem out of line to talk in affirmative tones about the pluses in the face of so many minuses. But the truth of the matter is that the fishing in most cases hasn't really changed a bit, and in many cases, for reasons already explained, it's actually increased in productivity. So why not take advantage of these opportunities? I've enjoyed some of the best bass fishing I have ever had on reservoirs that under normal circumstances seem to be very reluctant of giving up any of their bass. But there is yet another circumstance brought about by the drought that I would hope everyone concerned would want to take advantage of. A good number of these reservoirs are at their lowest water levels since their original fillings. Now is the time for concerned bass clubs as well as individual Bassmasters to offer their services to state and federal protection agencies for the unique opportunity of planting artificial structure that will greatly enhance the fishery once the rains return and the reservoirs, with God's will, begin to fill again. That's a good idea. What could be a better time to start placing man-made structure or cover, brush piles and tire pilings, whatever. Now's like a good time to do that when the water's low, right? That sounds like a good idea. All right, last paragraph. Here, we're wrapping it up. What better opportunity than now to turn California's substrate-starved reservoirs into once again productive habitats that might benefit the fishery as well as the bass anglers for years to come. The end. All right, so with that, I will say, yeah, one thing about low water allows bush, small bushes and whatever else to grow on that exposed dry land as long as it's exposed for a long enough period of time. But all that stuff will reflood, and there should be a resurgence in the fishery once it comes up again. It'll come up, give it a year or two, and there should be some really good bass spawns. And because you got all this flooded brush that is growing in, because all that land was exposed, so you get all this brushy stuff, all these plants that just invade really quick. Then the water comes back up, fish spawn, all these fry have little places to hide in this newly flooded cover, and you get some really good fishing. So I don't know, it's not super low water is worrisome for water supply purposes for cities, but fishing, I don't know, hopefully it comes, like Lake Mead right now, hopefully it comes back up. Doesn't seem like, it really doesn't seem like it's going to. Lake Mead's like 25% low. That's beautiful. I love fishing there. Hate to lose that one. Anyways, but if you lose it, you're going back. The natural Colorado River was a beautiful thing on its own. So if we lose it, we lose it. We still have the beautiful Colorado River and those recreational opportunities. Okay. What else? Is there anything else? There's so many interests. I could spend the next 3 hours on this. God, there's just so many cool things in here. Just every page. Look at that. Is that Rick Lund? There he is. There's Rick Lund. He's promoting the Glasstron. He's promoting Glasstron bass boats. Rick, the king. Awesome. All right, well, this video is now over. You guys are now either turned away from this channel, or you're asleep. Good night. Good nap. Good morning. Good everything. Over.